Harvard versus Trump, $2 billion funding cut battle explained, academic freedom at stake. Imagine a courtroom showdown where two powerful legal teams squared off, each representing one of America's most iconic institutions. But here's where it gets controversial. Harvard University found itself at odds with the Trump administration over a multi-billion-dollar funding dispute. This clash isn't just about money, it's about academic freedom, research integrity, and the delicate balance between institutional autonomy and government oversight. On Monday, in a Boston courtroom, Judge Allison Burroughs presided over a heated hearing. The stakes were high as both sides presented their cases regarding President Donald Trump's decision to slash over $2 billion in federal grants meant for Harvard's educational programs. The administration's stated aim was to curb antisemitism on campus, but Judge Burroughs appeared skeptical. She questioned how withholding funds designated for medical research could possibly address hate crimes. Her skepticism was palpable when she referred to the government's arguments as mind-boggling. Harvard's legal team, led by Stephen Lehetsky, argued that the funding cuts were unwarranted and harmful. They emphasized the profound impact of these reductions on ongoing research projects ranging from cancer treatments to space exploration. Lehetsky pointed out that Harvard's contributions to American science and medicine span nearly 8 decades. The administration is trying to exert control over the inner workings of our institution, he said, adding that there was no concrete evidence linking the funding cuts to a reduction in anti-Semitic incidents. On the other side, Michael Velchik, representing the Trump administration, countered that Harvard had failed to comply with an executive order aimed at combating anti-Semitism. Velchik highlighted a series of anti-Israel protests on campus as evidence of the university's bias. Harvard wants billions of dollars, and that's why we're here, he declared, drawing a connection between the protests and the suspension of critical research. Judge Burroughs pressed the government's lawyers on their methodology for assessing Harvard's compliance with the executive order. She demanded clear evidence and procedures to substantiate their claims. Don't you need to prove that each researcher is anti-Semitic, she challenged, questioning the legitimacy of a blanket condemnation of the entire institution. The judge's reluctance to issue an immediate ruling reflects the complexity of the case. Both parties have requested a swift resolution, with Harvard setting a deadline of September 3 for the judge to decide. However, the outcome is likely to be appealed, potentially reaching the Supreme Court. Outside the courthouse, supporters rallied to defend academic freedom and protest against what they saw as an infringement on Harvard's rights. Meanwhile, Trump himself chimed in on Truth Social, accusing Judge Burroughs of bias and promising to appeal any unfavorable ruling. This controversy is part of a broader pattern of tension between the Trump administration and elite Ivy League universities. Earlier this year, ICE issued subpoenas to Harvard seeking information on international students, and Trump had previously floated the idea of revoking Harvard's tax-exempt status. In March, Columbia University reached a settlement with the administration, agreeing to implement changes in response to threats of funding cuts. However, the administration remains unsatisfied and has continued to apply pressure. As this case unfolds, it raises important questions about the role of government in regulating higher education and the potential consequences of such interventions. How far can the administration go in policing the speech and behavior of universities? And what does this mean for academic freedom and institutional independence in the future? These issues are likely to resonate well beyond the walls of Harvard and have significant implications for the broader landscape of higher education in America. Harvard funding lawsuit, judge questions government's justification. A federal judge casts doubt on government's funding freeze decision. News. The Harvard Crimson. Updated July 21, 2025, at 6:43 p.m. Boston, a federal judge recently raised serious questions about the government's justification for halting nearly $3 billion in research funding to Harvard, as lawyers for both sides pushed for a quick resolution in a high-stakes case that could reshape the university's research future. In a packed courtroom, U.S. District Judge Allison Burroughs challenged the Department of Justice's argument that the funding cuts were tied to the White House's goal of addressing anti-Semitism at the university. They're not funding speech, they're funding research. And you're linking that research to speech, Burroughs told Michael K. Velchik 12, who represented the government. The 3-hour hearing saw Harvard's legal team condemn the Trump administration's freeze as unconstitutional and a violation of free speech rights. Stephen P. Lehetsky, Harvard's lawyer, called the administration's actions a blatant, unrepentant violation of the First Amendment. Velchik defended the cuts, arguing they were a necessary response to anti-Semitic incidents at Harvard, including the university's handling of pro-Palestine protests and the vandalism of the John Harvard statue following the Hamas attacks on Israel. He cited lawsuits against Harvard, donor withdrawals, and criminal charges against Jewish students as evidence of the university's failure to address antisemitism. But Burroughs pressed Velchik on the connection between combating antisemitism and freezing research funds. She criticized the government for protesting Jews and upholding American values while taking steps antithetical to those interests. Velchik countered that federal agencies were simply following grant contracts to redirect funds away from projects misaligned with government priorities. Burroughs warned that accepting Velchik's argument would have staggering consequences for constitutional law, as it could allow the government to terminate grants even if it violated the Constitution. Hours after the hearing, President Trump attacked Burroughs on social media, calling her a total disaster and vowing to appeal her decision if she ruled in Harvard's favor. This case is part of a months-long clash between Harvard and the Trump administration, which began with a March 2025 review of billions in federal research funds under investigation for antisemitism. The administration later sent Harvard a letter demanding compliance with its policies, including audits, changes to hiring practices, and ending diversity programs. Harvard rejected these demands, leading to the freezing of billions in federal funds. The freeze has devastated Harvard's research community, forcing scientists to pause projects, including cancer treatments, and triggering layoffs, hiring freezes, and wage pauses. The university also sued the administration over threats to international students, which the court temporarily blocked. Despite these challenges, Harvard and the administration resumed negotiations last month, though little public detail has emerged. The Trump administration continues to escalate pressure, threatening Harvard's accreditation, subpoenaing records, and accusing the university of violating civil rights laws. As the legal battle intensifies, the question remains: is the government's fight against antisemitism justified, or is it an overreach that undermines free speech and academic freedom? What role should the judiciary play in resolving this contentious conflict?